All right, we're going to talk about finding slope today. I can determine the slope of a line given a table. Now, we've looked at slopes from lines and points and stuff like that from graphs, but today we're going to look at just if you're given a table, how would you find the slope of that line? Here's our formula that we use, the change in y over the change in x. And I like to use this little thing right here. This is a delta. It's a little Greek letter, but in math it means the change in. So if you want to write all of this out, you can, but I like to use this little shortcut here. So I can write just a little triangle, change in y over change in x, and that's how we find slope. So really all we need to do is find out how our y is changing and how our x is changing. It's very similar to when we were doing the line on the graph. If I put a grid line on here, we would see how much it changes going up and how much it changes going over. And that would be our rise and our run. So we're going to do the same thing, only we're just going to look at just the numbers and how they change. So here's our first example. So the slope is change in y over change in x. So you do want to be very careful because most of the time when you make tables, y is on the bottom and x is on the top. But when I do my slope, it's the change in y that goes on top. So I'm going to find my changes, but I'm going to make sure I put that y on top because remember, a slope of 1/2 and a slope of 2 over 1 are very different lines. They aren't the same, so you can't flip them. They have to be in the right place. All right, so let's look over here at our y first. If I start at 12 and then it goes to 9, that gives me a change of -3. Now, it's negative because the number went down. So I'm getting smaller. I know I've got a negative. 9 to 6, change of -3. 6 to 3, change of -3. That means the number on the top is going to be a -3. My y changes by -3 each time. Now, on the top, the x's from 1 to 3 is a change of 2, and it's a positive 2 because my numbers are getting bigger. Change from 3 to 5 is a positive 2. Change from 5 to 7 is a positive 2. So my change in x then is a positive 2. So my slope is -3 over 2. Now, if you could simplify the fraction, you want to do that. You always, always, always simplify a fraction. If you can, simplify. But in this case, I can't. It is an improper fraction, but that's fine. You can leave it as improper because it signifies our rise and our run. So we can leave it that way. We don't want to change it to a mixed number. Okay, let's look at this one. Again, we're going to do the change in y. Oops. I'm going to scoot this over a little bit. Change in y, or delta y, over delta x, change in x, equals, I'm going to start with the bottom, my y here, because that's what goes on top, and that's kind of where my brain goes first. And I'm going to see, how does it change from a -2 to a -1? Now, that's actually getting bigger, so I know it's positive, and it looks like it's changing 1. From -1 to 0 is a change of 1. From 0 to a 1 is 1. So it looks like my y changes by 1. My x then changes by 4, and this one is 4, and this one is 4. So my x changes by 4. So it looks like my slope is 1/4. And of course you can't simplify that, so I am done. All right, this one, change in y, change in x. It's going to start down here. How does my y change? It's going up. Looks like it's increasing by 2 each time. 2, 2. So my change in y is 2. My x is changing by 1. So I have 1. Now, my slope, this time I can reduce because 2 over 1, I don't really need that denominator. I can just change it to a slope of 2. And that would be my solution, slope of 2. If, for some reason, these numbers do not all come out to be the same, you're going to have to check and make sure it is a line. But But if these aren't the same and these aren't the same, you can always go back to checking just these two. Because if you look here, I've got a 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So the ratio is all the same. So if I were to skip, remember how we talked about whenever you were doing them on the graphs, you could pick any two lines you wanted to. You see, let's say I picked from here to here. Well, from 1 to 5 is 4, and from 0 to 2 is 2. So if I did that slope, the change in y is 4 over the x, which is 2. But see, 4 over 2 reduces to 2. So it still works that any 2 points that you pick, you're going to get the same slope. They just reduce. We just try to stick to, you know, the one right next to it because usually you don't have to reduce. All right. Why don't you pause the video and give this one a try yourself, and then when you get an answer, if you'll unpause it, I will do it with you. Okay, so this one looks a little different because our chart now is kind of upright instead of on its side. But again, we want to be careful and notice that this is our y's and that these are our x's. So, change in y over change in x. Still going to do that. Going to do y first. So, this looks like it's getting smaller, going from -4 to -9, so I've got a -5. From 9 to -14 is a -5. From 14 to -19 is -5, and -5. So it looks like the change in y is a -5. On this side, I'm getting bigger by 1. Each time, bigger by 1. So my denominator is a 1. When I simplify that, my slope is -5. Okay, so that is how you find the slope of a line from a table. Thanks.